Good morning, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing, we wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in to listen to our discussion on paranormal after the pandemic, we welcome you in. For those of you out there who are writers, and I know there's more than a few, we suggest you check out our affiliate at Affinity Writing and Editing Services. That's at Affinity WES on Facebook and on Twitter. If you do anything with words, they can help. So at Affinity WES on Twitter or Facebook. For those of you who like crystals and tea and other such lovely things, on Etsy.com there's Hippie Witch Vibes. That's Hippie Witch Vibes. They have an increasing assortment of products. It's difficult for me to recommend everything because it's just all so fantastic. So go over to Hippie Witch Vibes on Etsy.com and don't be afraid to let them know the Silverlight Show sent you over. The pandemic has affected our lives in so many ways over the past year and a bit. And judging by the way people are talking about a third wave, it's going to continue to affect us. One of the biggest casualties, I'll call it that, is in the paranormal. You see, the paranormal is basically people experiencing the unusual. You don't really experience the unusual by staying at home. The paranormal happens when you go out, when you discover new things, when you buy a new house. All sorts of crazy things. You can't see a UFO if you're inside your own four walls. You won't see a ghost at home because you already know the ghosts in your home. And Bigfoot isn't coming into town just to wave in your window and say, "Hi there, I exist." I pick on UFOs, Bigfoot, and ghosts quite frequently because they're technically the big three of the paranormal. Everybody is familiar with them at one point or another. Whether you call a UFO by any other name, flying saucers, etc., whether you call a ghost, a spirit, an ancestor, whatever it may be, whether Bigfoot is a Yeti, a Sasquatch, a Florida skunk ape, whatever you call them, everybody has those three concepts in mind, especially when you talk about the paranormal. Now, they're often broke down into three different categories, but I don't consider them that distinct. Researchers will argue over them and try to defend their territory because, let's be honest, people tend to specialize in their knowledge. And the pandemic has shown us exactly that. People who were interested in UFOs and the paranormal before, see, even I unconsciously do it, they're not so much interested in it. For the past year, they were more interested in fighting about politics, and in the present year, now they're kind of saying, "Come on, we're sick of the restrictions. When can we go out?" The fact is, we were always allowed to go out. UFOs are there all the time. You just need to get a nice pair of binoculars, not even a nice one, but something that lets you see a little more than the human eye can. Go out back on a nice night, or if you're in an apartment building, just point them up above you. Depending on the light pollution you have, you're going to see something. Might be a satellite going over, might even be a piece of space debris. If you're lucky, it'll be the International Space Station, which is always interesting to see. But nothing is stopping you from still looking into the paranormal despite the lockdown. Yes, you can't go to spooky places. Yes, you can't go on a hiking expedition in the Himalayas to try to find the Yeti. But at the same token, you are absolutely able to keep what you love. The pandemic has made people focus inward, which is a justifiable response. I mean, we're not allowed to go out and socialize as much as we used to, and even when we are, we're focused on the pandemic because it's worldwide news. It's taking over everything. Meanwhile, the US government has been letting pilots from the Tic Tac incident come forth and talk. Almost no one is even noticing this. This is one of the biggest incidents to happen over the past 20 years, and no one is even noticing it. They're not even paying attention. Even when pilots are starting to come forward and relate their experiences, it's less interesting than what is happening to us in our own lives. This is symbolic of many things. I'm noticing an increase on traffic on the witch and warlock spellcasting forums. Because people are looking for some sort of way to exercise more control in their life. UFOs and ghosts and Bigfoot don't do that because they're examples of what we don't have control over. They make us wonder what could be. They make us aspire to be more. Witchcraft generally is about, oh, my neighbor pissed me off, I need a sour jar spell to get them. Oh, I need good luck in this, what ritual can I perform? And I'm not insulting witchcraft here, and magic in general. Magic is just as valid as science is. It's an attempt to influence the world around us. Well, that's what science does. A car is your attempt to get to where you're going faster. It just has had several hundred years to develop, and most of the technology has become hidden. Most people out there don't know how to change their oil. They take it into a technician, and the technician does it. There's nothing wrong with this. Not everybody knows how to fix their computer. Not everybody even knows how to fix a lighter. That's the non-disposable ones. But the fact is, science has developed to the point where it's become invisible. It was once believed that everybody would have a big generator in their basement, and that would be what would provide the electricity that we all use. Well, instead, Edison and Tesla developed massive coils and engines and things like that so that we could have power everywhere. And then batteries were developed for portable power. You don't think about the power in your cell phone until it starts running about 14%, but think about the infrastructure behind it. Somewhere there's a power plant guiding energy to your house and into your phone. Or perhaps, like me, you have a solar charger, which appears to be magic. My solar charger I can put under the sun, plug it into my cell phone, and it doesn't need any electricity from coal-fired plants, from nuclear plants, from anything that might damage the environment. Just my little solar energy collector and my phone. Some people would look at that and think, that's magical, because it's completely different than the norm. It's just another form of science. And magic is another method of explaining the world. In my opinion, it doesn't contradict science in any way, shape, or form. Any reasonable scientist is going to tell you we don't fully understand the world. And that's the truth. They just announced that the universe is expanding faster than they ever imagined before. Okay, I'm cool with that. They also announced there's a whole series of particles that they've theorized that should be out there that exist that we've never detected before. This is good. This shows science is expanding its knowledge. Now, when science announces there's things they don't know, people don't panic and freak out. But when a psychic announces that, or a wizard, or whatever that person may call themselves, people immediately turn around, well, you don't know what you're doing. Meanwhile, scientists do this every single day of their lives. They admit there's things they don't know. Psychics, think what you will of them, but they're actually recognized by the government. Not officially, but the Stargate project in the 1970s and 1980s was training remote viewers, as they called them, specifically to be able to spy on enemies, and they wanted to be able to influence those enemies. This has been a project that has been approached with scientific methods. They tried to quantify the unquantifiable. And depending on who you talk to, they got results. To this day, there are still people from that program, including Major Ed Dames, who's a controversial figure, but other people have come forward to not only confirm the project existed, But there were a lot of people involved. The United States government went in pretty heavily on its psychic spies. Even though a remote viewer will tell you they are not a psychic, what they are doing is not really scientific either. They cannot explain it scientifically, yet they got positive results. Let's think about that for a second. Something that shouldn't work by any stretch or definition, because here we are, bags of meat and water and flesh. We have no connection to each other that can be measured. This is entirely what science is based on. If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And the paranormal, by definition, cannot be measured. It's paranormal, just to the side of normal. Or as we might call it in the modern terminology, anormal, as in atypical, because it's not normal. Nothing wrong with it. We have neuroatypical people, which are people whose brains don't work quite the same way. Physically atypical people who might be missing an arm or a limb. They're still people. They're still fully legitimate. And the paranormal is exactly the same. Just because it's not normal doesn't mean it doesn't exist. UFOs in particular have always been interesting to me. And I admit over the years I've moved pretty far away from the nuts and bolts camp in UFOs. It just doesn't make any sense to me that an alien would travel millions of miles to hang out with humans. Or if they did, they'd have a better reason for it than to abduct us and tell us that better things are coming, to warn us about nuclear war. They would have ways to do that without spending the money on a spaceship and coming here. If they want resources, they could easily be mining the Kuiper Belt, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, all those things without ever bothering us. So once again, it makes no sense for them to come here in a nuts and bolts spacecraft. They might have nuts and bolts spacecraft, and they might be very impressive nuts and bolts spacecraft, on par with Star Trek and Star Wars. But they would use those for much more important things. To communicate with the primitive ape creatures of the third planet of the Sol system, I believe they would have something akin to remote viewing. And believe me, remote viewers themselves have reported they have had contact with alien species. Alien presences, even things beyond what we would consider alien, almost godlike. So what makes more sense? If you accept remote viewing and psychics are possible, would it not make sense for an alien civilization to make contact with us through that means, and to let us know by a mental effort rather than spending time, resources, and energy to send 1, 2, 3, even 4 of their kind down in a pod to buzz around a city and look around? Of course, it makes much more sense if they can do it with a specialized group of psychics. This also leads us to another interesting situation. People are not really very psychic. Sure, there's people that just seem to naturally know what's going on. There's people who can play the stock market like a fiddle and just know when things are right. We all know those gamblers who just magically know when to stop rolling the dice, when to walk away from the table, or when a machine is going to be hot. This is not an anomaly. This is actually the way humans are supposed to be. Once again, the pandemic has done us a favor and a disservice because it's making us look inward, but not at the right parts. We should be looking more to our intuition. We should be thinking about ourselves and how our place in the universe is meant to be. Some people did spend their time learning to develop those skills, looking inward, being introspective, and they have benefited greatly. There are others who have chosen to look inward and just focus on all the negative, and they've used their time poorly. Now, there was an interesting theory put forward by J. Michael Straczynski in Babylon 5. The Narn race claimed they had no natural psychics because they had gone through a time in their history where they had killed them all. Now, if you look at Earth history, there's a very long period of time where psychics and mages and people who could communicate with the dead were hunted down and killed en masse. Everybody likes to point to the Salem witch trials, but the Salem witch trials was kind of a last gasp of that mentality. It was going on for centuries before that. If you believe in the Bible, even as a reflection of the truth, King Saul goes to a necromancer, the Witch of Endor, as she was known, in an attempt to contact the spirit of Samuel. Saul doesn't turn around and say, witches don't exist. He actually passed a decree that any witch should be executed on sight. This shows us that witches and soothsayers were well enough developed that the king felt the need to regulate them, despite the fact that Samuel could perform miracles and was accepted into the temple as one of its highest priests. There was definitely a double standard. If you were part of the institution, you were okay. But if you were not, you were not okay. Spells and witchcraft date back to the earliest records that we have. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is possibly the oldest piece of fiction, although I'm waiting, I'm sure they'll eventually discover something else. People love telling stories to each other, and those stories had to be recorded in one form or another. The Epic of Gilgamesh has magical things all over the place. The world is perceived to be made of magic. That's not just the idea of a primitive mind. Gilgamesh is admitting he doesn't know what makes half this stuff work, so it must be godly or magical. Because that was the science of the day. Everybody knew how to make fire. Not everybody knew how to make fire on a wet day. Everybody would be able to feed one another. Not everybody knew how to heal one another. And some things like garlic, and I'm going to use garlic for now, can be made into an antiseptic pad. Mush down and it'll help fight infections. That's magic to these people. And that's why healers were so respected, because they had the wisdom that had been passed down for generations. Much like today, we teach scientists what they need to know. So, science and magic share a very similar path of history. The only difference is, since Isaac Newton codified his laws, science has gotten a significant advantage. And it has developed dramatically. Magic has progressed much more slowly. Because magic is evolutionary and science is revolutionary. Nobody could have predicted how the microchip would have changed technology in the future. And imagine how different science would be if we were still relying on vacuum tubes. Would we have the internet? Quite possibly. I can imagine a world that would need the internet with big machines and people queuing up to use it in the library. But it would be a very different world. Another very interesting thing is, again, going back to aliens and UFOs, looking at the cost-benefit analysis to contact people, you might not even have to contact them. Psychic influences come across very differently to different people. It's theorized that, it's been demonstrated in certain experiments that if you put somebody into a chamber that resonates at 19 megahertz, they begin to experience a numinous feeling. Now, what a numinous feeling means is it's a feeling of a presence of a god, the angels, a ghost, spirits, whatever you have it, they begin to feel that way. Now 19 hertz is a very interesting frequency. It's also the frequency at which a lion growls. So it was a survival advantage for our ancestors to be able to perceive 19 megahertz. Sorry, 19 hertz. 19 hertz. It's a survival advantage for them to be able to hear a lion nearby growling, letting them know there was a problem. Also, 19 hertz is technically below our hearing range, which is 20 hertz. So we are able to hear things that are outside of our range of hearing. Our bodies are able to be influenced by those very things. Curious, isn't it, that our body would be hardwired to react to things that we cannot consciously sense, that is impossible for our senses to register. Thus, if an alien species did reach out to contact us, telepathically, mentally, whatever you want to call it, maybe one of the side effects would be us seeing things that are not necessarily there. It makes sense. Everybody reacts differently to strange stimuli. And you can do this very simply by watching a bunch of 18-year-olds get drunk for the first time, or whatever the age of drinking is in your particular country. They all start to act weird. Some say, I can't feel my legs. Some start getting personality changes, going from a wallflower to more extroverted. Some of the more extroverted get kind of crazy. But everybody reacts differently. And this is alcohol. This is something we all understand. But an 18-year-old doesn't understand it because they don't have experience with it. The same with tobacco, marijuana, etc. So you can see that there is a definite correlation in the brain between experiencing something unusual and having a reaction that would be out of the ordinary. Again, it's an atypical situation, not typical. So your response will be not typical. Science is fantastic for measuring everyday things. Anything that is reproducible. But science needs things to be reproducible. They need to know every time you open the window, a wind will blow in. It's just a question of how much wind is going to blow in. And science will tell you the exact answer every time. 3 kilometers per hour, 10 kilometers per hour, whatever it might be, science can measure that because they know that wind will be at a certain rate, at a certain pressure, etc., etc. Where science begins to falter is when it doesn't know what's happening. And that again is where the paranormal comes in. UFOs are so extremely maneuverable because they are not bound by the laws of physics. They're not bound by the laws of humankind. They're bound by their own laws. And those are the laws of the mind. So, once you're dealing with the laws of the mind, you really have to start thinking, what is the mind capable of? Excuse me, my voice is really not doing very good today. Don't worry, I'm not sick. The pandemic hasn't hit me. It's just a lot of things over the past little bit. Going back to your mind, though, what is your mind capable of doing? And the answer is your mind is capable of doing anything. You can imagine it. Anything. You can imagine a beautiful field. You can imagine a seaside where somebody is bringing you a cocktail. There's wonderful, beautiful people all around you. Whatever your fantasy might be. You can imagine a pile of gold. And all I had to do is say the words pile of gold. Your mind immediately imagined it, and it existed in your mind for a little bit. That's kind of what the paranormal does. While everything is not immediately available, the paranormal can grant you access to anything in your mind. And UFOs are probably the most realistic thing that is available in your mind. The second most realistic thing would be talking to spirits, talking to ancestors, etc., because they're all around us all the time. They're trying to talk to us. They're in our ears. They're in our thoughts. They're in our prayers. And this is what people don't realize. During the pandemic, people were focused on their lives, but just in, I can't afford my steak and lobster dinner, so I have to have macaroni and cheese instead. We kicked into survival mode. Some people got very bitter about this. And if you have a Facebook or a Twitter account, you know how bitter they got about it. Once the whole schism involving U.S. politics died down, people went right back to protesting about how they were being unfairly treated. Yes, this is a time where we're not being treated fairly, but at the same token, I'm watching the cases go day by day. And we've got to put aside what we want for a little bit. Now, how long is a little bit? I don't know. But I would think governments are going to be very, very reluctant to try to force us all back into our houses again. I stand to be corrected. But now people have gone into survival mode. There's two types of people. Well, there's many types of people. There's two types of people out there. Those that have decided that survival mode is going to include bettering themselves, and those that have decided that survival mode is being selfish. I would love to tell you I'm one of the ones that decided to better myself, but I can't deny that I have been selfish at times. I'm kind of a mixed bag. And I imagine most of you out there are as well. Remember people running up to stock up on toilet paper? That's right. Toilet paper. It's still a bit of a running joke. All you have to do is mention it and people remember that for weeks people didn't have toilet paper. Where I was working, we didn't have toilet paper, we didn't have hand sanitizer, we didn't have any of that stuff. There was that one guy that bought 1 million boxes of hand sanitizer and then found that there was nowhere for him to sell them. He was being selfish. But the same token, he was trying to make a buck. And this is what losing contact with the spiritual world will do for you. It'll make you interested in making a buck. It'll make you only think about where your next dollar is coming from. And unfortunately, the major corporations, that's all they've been thinking of. Where their next dollar is coming from. Humans, as in you and I, just regular, typical, or as typical as we can be, humans, have to think about that. What can we do that's going to counteract all these selfish people in the world? Well, the easiest thing to do is to open your mind's eye. It's to imagine, to think what you can do to be a better person yourself. Because there's nothing wrong with looking to the sky, looking for a UFO. You might not be able to go out right now and see a spirit or a spook or whatever you want to call it at the local haunted house. That time will come, but this would be a fantastic time to do research, to look at new theories. Are these spirits of the dead trying to contact us? Is it some sort of weird phenomena that produces 19 hertz? What do you want to be looking for? As far as Sasquatch goes, Yeti, Bigfoot, whatever you call them, there are so many interesting examples of it. You can probably find one not too far away from you, within a reasonable drive. Like I said, they're not going to come into the big city, but elk do, deer do, skunks do. All sorts of creatures from outside are willing to come into the city. Bigfoot has shown intelligence by choosing not to. But there's still quite a few in the North American forested regions in the north. The Himalayas have a lot of them, and pretty much everywhere in the world, including Australia, which is not known for having large hidden animals, they have their yowie yowie. So no matter where you are in the world, you can go out, use the internet for now and discover what's your next big thing to do. Almost every single place has a guidebook for, 50 or 100 haunted or unusual attractions. And if you can't do if that book does not exist for your region, maybe you should be the one to publish it. After all, right now is a time of opportunity. So many niches are not being looked at, whether it's UFOs, whether it's spirits, or whether it's Bigfoot. This is a time to go and get into a new market that you haven't gotten into before. And it could be one that's spiritually fulfilling. Maybe this is the time for you to develop your interest in psychic activity. Maybe it's time to experiment with alchemy or witchcraft, which both take time, but are definitely worth it, if for nothing else than to see what the results are. Expand your mind, because an investment into your mind will never fail to pay off. And that is the central message to this broadcast. Invest in your mind. It's your most valuable tool. And I cannot recommend enough that you go out and use this time to explore new ventures. The old way is coming to an end. Jobs are going to get scarcer and scarcer. You have to make your own future. So do it. Make your own future. And make it the best future possible. And the way to do that is invest in your mind. Maybe you don't believe in the UFOs, ghosts, and spirits thing. That's fine. But still, use your mind, decide what you want to believe in. Maybe you believe in quantum physics. Maybe you believe in nuclear power. Whatever it is, this is the time. This is the place. So look to the future and make sure that you're positioned for the best possible future for you. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Silverlight Show. It's going to be a bit shorter. I'm going to cut back a little bit so I can publish more episodes each week and give people a little bit more entertainment. Don't forget, we don't have a Patreon. We don't believe in money for nothing in this channel. So the link for our books will be in the description. I have a new book coming out in April that will be a children's book. Kind of an adventure. It's something I haven't tried before, but always worth a shot for anything new. See, I'm investing in my mind. I might not be physically able to do some of the things I used to be able to do, but I can still use my mind. And anyway, that's enough preaching from me. Turn that telescope to the sky. Look for a UFO. Get a pair of binoculars. You can usually get them pretty cheap. Go online. Look into spirits and what you can do to attract them. Maybe find out the closest Bigfoot has come to your town. But most importantly, whatever you do, we hope you have a great day.